Absolutely. You would think that the existence of counterfeits should be really bad for the authentic brands. But when you look into it, it turned out that that's not necessarily the case. And in some cases, in fact, that because of the change in the consumer behavior, and the luxury brands may actually benefit from the existence of counterfeits.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today.
So, what is the impact of counterfeit luxury items on the luxury product market in general? It's an interesting question when you consider how the consumer thinks about the advantage that counterfeit products provide. But then there is also how companies that produce luxury products, as well as people with means buying luxury items, react to these knockoff items being in the mix. Our next guest says that this all creates a maximalist luxury strategy. That guest is John Zhang, who is a marketing professor here at the Wharton School. He was also one of the people involved in writing this research paper back in 2021. John, great to see you again. How are you?
Well, good to see you, Dan. Very good.
This is such an interesting topic because I think so many people know these products are out there, but we don't look deeper into just the kind of the impact that they can have not only on the consumer, but on the companies involved.
Absolutely. You would think that the existence of counterfeits should be really bad for the authentic brands. But when you look into it, it turned out that that's not necessarily the case. And in some cases, in fact, that because of the change in the consumer behavior, and the luxury brands may actually benefit from the existence of counterfeits.
So this maximalist strategy, tell us more about it.
Well, imagine this, and why exactly you want to spend so much money to buy the luxury brands in the first place? The reason why you want to do that is because you want to signal to others your status of wealth, right? Why you want to signal your status of wealth? The reason is because once your status is known, you can imagine that all the doors in the society will be open for you, right? So you want to do that. But in order to do that, you have to send effective signal to other people. The way you send the effective signal is to buy expensive luxury goods that other people without the wealth would not want to mimic. And so then you would stand out. If you use the luxury goods, then other people cannot. So essentially for luxury brands, and the reason why they can charge such high prices is simply because they help the people with wealth to send the effective signal to others that indeed they are wealthy. And then they will reap the benefits from every corner of the society. And so because of that, you can imagine that the presence of counterfeits could be a problem for luxury brands. Right. Simply because the people would buy the counterfeits to mimic what wealthy people would do, right? In this case, you can imagine that if I'm the wealthy person, I still want to stand out.
Sure.
And the way to stand out is to stack the deck and, in fact, make sure that you buy a lot more luxury goods and put them on display so that the other people just cannot mimic that.
So how does that then change the perception and the thinking of the luxury brand? Because for a long time, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea of the luxury brand was to produce enough items so that people felt good, but there was an intrinsic value in the fact that they didn't produce as many items. There was that value there. Now it seems like they feel a little bit like the more the merrier.
That's actually right. That's the direction probably the luxury brands want to go. The reason is because and for the rich to stand out, you can imagine that, given that counterfeit goods are around and everybody can mimic you. Okay, then what you want to do is to make it more difficult for people to mimic the behavior you display. Okay, the way to do that is to buy a lot of luxury goods and put them on display at the same time.
Right.
But if you actually, let's suppose the person without money and you have to go to the back alley to buy some of the counterfeit goods and try to assemble them together in such a big display, is very, very difficult to do. So that's how you can stand out. So given that, you can imagine that if you're the luxury brand company, obviously that you want to produce more variety of goods, and that would satisfy the demands from the people who want to have this maximum display and to stand out.
Does the element of e-commerce change some of the mindset here as well? Only because I say, you talk about the back alleys. Well, realistically, if you go online, you're going to see so many advertisements for, a golf shirt from Augusta National that's maybe not $200, but it's $20, and a customer may feel very comfortable with it. I mean, the internet has kind of opened the doors to e-commerce, really bringing in a lot of these knockoff items.
That's absolutely true. In fact, that if you go online, it's much easier for you to buy the counterfeit goods. But still, even in that situation, you can imagine that if I'm the luxury brand, I can produce more different variety. And for instance, it's not just the clothes, apparel, bags. You could have the jewelry. You could have a cell phone. You could have a lot of other things, right? So in that case, that even if you buy online, it's very difficult for you to assemble everything together.
One of the things you mentioned in the paper is that some of this happening can actually spur on those that maybe have the wealth to want to buy more products of the luxury brand. Tell us a little bit about that reaction.
Well, that's the idea. In fact, that once I was invited by a very rich student and to have a dinner with her. Indeed, that she showed up with all the luxury goods from top to the bottom, and with the cell phone from Prada, and everything is Prada. So I was wondering what's going on here, and she was basically saying that in China, and there are a lot of fake goods. If you just use one or two, okay, people probably automatically infer that those are fake goods, right? But if you do it from top to the bottom with all the jewelry, with the cell phone, everything else, you can imagine that even in China to assemble them all together is very, very difficult, and unless you do it in the authorized store and where you have everything. So that's how you can actually stand out.
So the luxury companies, with all of this going on, this obviously has to affect their decision, not only about how many items they're producing, but the types of items that they're producing going forward as well.
Absolutely. That's really the indication. Of course, that the maximalist luxury is only one of the trends initiated by the counterfeit goods. And you have also minimalist luxury. So you want to buy and fewer and buy better. And so which basically means that you probably want to produce some of the unique item that's very, very expensive that imitator just cannot afford to do it.
Is there an element of how much the luxury company is producing designed to counteract the levels that the knockoffs are producing? The more you produce of the better product, the more people may stay away from the knockoffs.
There has always been a race and there, right? So if you're the luxury brand company, obviously that you want to stay ahead of the game and stay ahead of the curve. You want to produce more, innovate more, and so that you basically keep your distance between you and the counterfeiters. That's always a good strategy.
How much then does the brand still carry a lot of the weight in this decision process? When you think about some of the names out there, Hermes, Versace, et cetera, those brands, you have an expectation of a higher end, higher quality product, and that brand draws the attention of the consumer.
Well, obviously, those brands carry a lot of weight and they sell a lot of goods. They still command the loyalty of a lot of customers. For Hermes, for instance, you could wait for a couple of years and before you can buy anything, that even if you have the money. And not only that, in fact, that nowadays that they look at your total purchase and before they actually let you buy some of the new products.
What does then this all mean for retail in general? Having this, to a degree, I guess it's a change of mindset by the luxury brands of being able to produce more to be able to fit into the marketplace.
Well, I think the luxury brands are constantly innovative. They want to come up with newer products and better products. And of course, they also retain some of the classic ones. And I think in that particular game, obviously, that the luxury brands and will always win. The reason is because in this society, just imagine that without luxury brands, the life would be very, very, and I guess, what would be the word I'm looking for? Would be very
Boring.
boring,
Yeah.
probably boring, and also colorless. Yeah.
What did you take from this research? What were the insights that really have driven your thinking moving forward about what luxury is probably doing now and where luxury will take us in the future?
So our research basically shows that number one, that something that looks apparently and bad and may not actually be bad, right? So for instance, at one point for high technology that happened too, is basically that people parrot some of the software, and eventually they basically realize that that's a good way to advertise and for their product. I think in the luxury goods industry that happens too. Okay, so that's number one, and number two, that the existence of a counterfeit goods and in fact that will fragment the market. In fact, you have people who pursue minimalist luxury. You also have people who pursue the maximalist luxury.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who do something in between, right? So which basically means that as luxury brands, you need to become aware of all those trends and in fact accommodate the change in consumer behavior. So that's definitely is a very important point we learned.
Has any of this changed the mindset of the companies that are producing the knockoffs? Like in terms of the type of quality that they feel they need to have so that they can be successful, knowing that the luxury brand has obviously changed their philosophies as well?
Well, apparently the knockoffs become more and more profitable for the manufacturers, right? And so not only you see a lot of very low quality knockoffs and on the streets of New York, for instance, and you also see some of the super fakes, and in fact they look just as real as the real ones, and in fact that you can actually buy it in a very secretive way online, for instance, and get those products. In fact, for those manufacturers, they make a tremendous amount of money, because they don't invest in the advertising, they don't invest in the branding and for those products.
So a super fake is just that next level up for the people producing the knockoff.
Absolutely. If you produce knockoffs, and over time you're going to get better at it, and in fact that you can do reverse engineering, and in fact you do a lot of innovation there too, and to catch up with real thing.
How then does the consumer look at what's going on with these two different styles of company and product right now?
Well, hopefully that from the luxury brand's point of view, you want some people who always use the authentic goods, right?
Yeah.
You probably have people who always who use the super fix, the certain kind of people. They probably cannot afford to and buy the real thing, and but eventually, if they get wealthy, they also buy the real thing. So in a way that probably super fix are a good introduction and to those people for the luxury category.
John, great to see you again. Thanks very much.
Really good to talk to you, Dan.
Thank you. John Zhang joining us here, Wharton marketing professor.
Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.